So for the past 6 months, we have been witnessing the downfall of some of the biggest comedy podcasts within the Rogan sphere, which has been pretty interesting to watch because unlike other podcasts or other shows that have ended because of disagreements, cancellations, or simply the host self-destructing, the way the podcasts like YMH, Two Bears, One Cave, and now it seems like Flagrant might be getting added to that list, the way that they all have been falling from the top has been wild, especially because when you look back at the timing of it, it seems like, I know it's cliche, but it seems like the bigger they got, the more successful they became, the more the shows suffered.
I hope you had a good podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that this was a growing podcast. They can't all be bangers, everybody. Well, sometimes one guy gets fucked up and gets in his emotions.
It was fun.
And although the podcast is still massively successful, there is no denying that the show has changed, and now for the better. Because again, it's not as simple as they just got more famous and so they changed. Obviously not. Because I mean, you can look at somebody like Joe Rogan, who has been massively successful for a while, and they never really changed the podcast, the show, regardless of all the other things they had going on. I mean, he had the UFC, the club that he was opening and touring at some point. So the fact that he was able to focus and put the show first above everything else does deserve a lot of credit, because when it comes to someone like Andrew Schulz, it doesn't seem like he's following that example and instead is focusing on everything else and leaving the show last. And it almost seems like Andrew Schulz is now trying to take the show in a different direction, and instead of trying to be the best hang on the internet and focusing on comedy, it does seem like they're avoiding burning or wasting material on the podcast that they could do on their own show, on stage. They essentially turned it into a male version of The View, where they no longer talk about nothing for 30 to 40 minutes and just have fun and crack jokes. And instead, they have the entire 2 hours, a set of topics, a list of topics, and, the world events and whatever that they go through and give their takes on. Now, obviously, that's not a new thing. They've always talked about politics and trending topics, but now it's a lot more frequently and less jokes and more serious takes and all that stuff. And it's gotten to the point that it's now starting to backfire. And Andrew Schulz seems to be not liking that feedback, that negative feedback. And it almost seems like he is in denial about a lot of the hates or the trolling and the negative feedback that he has been receiving recently.
When it feels too good to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the story feels too salacious.
The transmissibility, I was like, what the f?
I spoke about that on Rogan. It's so funny. People refuse. This is how terrifying echo chambers are. I spoke about it on Rogan, and I spoke about it, I thought, quite comprehensively. I was like, guys, this is not by design by the administration. I doubt they even want this.
Mm-hmm. They double down on it, but
they doubled down on it because it was already a thing. They didn't. Right? Like if it wasn't a thing, they wouldn't have doubled down on it. They wouldn't have switched it to replace Easter. They wouldn't go, we have a better day. But it just so happened that it landed on the same day as Easter, and they're like, we gotta. Right? I had Twitter accounts going, this is wrong. Just flat out, what Andrew is saying here is wrong. No explanation or anything. Yeah. And it's not wrong. It's actually right, what we're saying. The date was decided 15 years ago. They acknowledged it, 7 years ago? Or so maybe it was 3 or whatever the it was. But still, I 100% get that, and I understand the frustration. But it's those accounts that profit off of or brand around these ideas, going out of their way to discredit. Because I'm on this big platform, I'm on Rogan, and we're having this conversation that is nuanced, and they feel the need to discredit it because it goes against the narrative that they have put out there in the world, knowing that it's fake. I just couldn't believe it. I thought this one was going to be one where, okay, we just ignore it. By we, I mean they. They just ignore it. They're like, oh, let's just ignore this one. Yeah, this is kind of true. We kind of ran with this thing, but it's kind of...
Now, Andrew Schulz was talking about his most recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, which was pretty boring. I mean, I watched the entire thing, and although I understand that they don't have the closest relationship, friendship, or have the best chemistry, I mean, the entire podcast was them talking about the same old talking points that they have brought up in the past. Schulz was acting like he was having his mind blown the entire time, or as Shane would call it, a Schulz epiphany. And for some reason, instead of Andrew Schulz going on Rogan's podcast and telling him a funny story or a wild story that he's been holding on to, or even just a bit, instead, he decided to challenge Rogan with some political takes, which, Rogan obviously wasn't a fan of and didn't agree with. and it ended up backfiring. Now, I'm pretty sure that Andrew knew that he would be getting some sort of pushback, but I don't think he expected that much. And also, I'm not saying that he should have gone to Joe Rogan's podcast and told jokes and try to be funny. Obviously, that's not what the show is about. But for example, in terms of guests, if you compare him to someone like Theo Von, who I've heard other comedians on their shows talk about how Theo is the type of comic to burn material on a show, on a podcast that could be done on stage, but he just casually drops it on a podcast.
He would like show, we used to go by his house and get stoned. He was a substitute teacher, right? And he was also 78 years old.
Was there any real teachers?
Way too old.
Is there any real, like, were they all just like part-time teachers? Part-time should be in jail? Like, what the is happening right now?
I'm going to do my Andrew Schulz impersonation. No, man, I'll tell you, bro. There's that a lot of perv, dude. It's the bottom of where the Mississippi ends, man. It's where it's very silty alluvial soil down there, man.
But when it comes to shows, I'm not sure if he was trying to tap into a different audience, but he basically went on there, tried to make a smart argument or sound smart, failed, got a lot of backlash, and then didn't like the response that he got, because his response to all of that was that everyone was wrong and they just didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, I think it's a weird hill to die on, but it is interesting that he decided to focus on the people that were saying that he was wrong and trying to argue with him, instead of all the trolling and all the hate that he was receiving on the comments and all the negative, all the dislikes that he received. Because a while back, his own advice to Brendan Schaub was to lean into all the hate, which is interesting.
Unfortunately, what's happening with The Fighter and the Kid, like, they have a fucking great podcast. Like, they're hilarious together. Like, right. Brian and Brendan are fucking hilarious together. And Brendan's like a really great dude. He's a genuinely sweet dude who helps people. He's the reason I got on Rogan. Like, he was like, yo, you got to get this guy on. This is before anybody was looking at my shit. Like, and that really changed my life. And he's just getting destroyed by that thing. I told him to lean into it. I was like, bro, you got to sell merch. Like, anything that they do about you, you got to lean in. And then I thought that they would appreciate that in one way. They're like, oh, okay, he's not ignoring and acting like this thing isn't happening. He's like taking part of this thing.
And it is interesting that Andrew Schulz is basically doing the exact opposite and not following his own advice of leaning into the hate and not avoiding the negative feedback. And at some point, even went as far as to doubling down. Obviously not as bad as Tom Segura when he snapped at his own fans and called them out. But the argument that all the people that were hating on him or disagreeing with him were living in an echo chamber on the internet is pretty funny and ironic, because obviously that's the exact same thing that Andrew Schulz is doing right now with the show. Because before, maybe you could argue that Akash or some of the other guys on the show would challenge Andrew Schulz on some things and have a real conversation and even expose Andrew with like the whole tipping thing and all that thing that was funny. But it is now clear that Andrew Schulz completely blew up past everyone else, and it's now by far the most famous out of the four. So, naturally, they can't really tell him anything and argue with him. They all have become yes men based on what we see on the show, because even though they might have a different take or a slightly different opinion, at the end of the day, they all have to end up agreeing with Schulz, or he has to be the one that is right at the end of the day.
Andrew Schulz is wrong.
They don't care.
I feel like they convinced themselves that you're wrong.
Yo, you might be right. They're
truly.
Yeah, I think they're so locked in. Okay,
yeah.
I thought that they were just.
I don't think it's nefarious shit like
that's the thing.
No,
yeah,
I
think there are nefarious actors.
I'm sure there are some, but I think the majority.
We're actually talking about two of them early in this podcast. yeah.
J. Cole.
And also, for the past year, the show has been getting a massive new audience who obviously isn't a fan of what Flagrant 2 used to be, and for the most part are just huge fans of Andrew Schulz and really, really like everything that he does. And because of that, I do think his ego has gone through the roof, and at some point even took shots at Destiny for no reason, which I think it shows how he feels that what he's doing is way more important than what someone like Destiny is doing, which I think is silly. Obviously, Andrew Schulz and even Joe Rogan get all their information from the internet. And also they did have Hassan Piker on the show a while back, and Hassan basically does the exact same thing as Destiny, but they don't get along at all. And when Hassan was on the show, they were all very nice to him. They didn't make fun of him or press him about any of his political takes. And it makes me wonder if back then they thought the political streamers were cool, and now they think they're higher than that and they don't see them as valuable, Or maybe there is a chance that he doesn't like Destiny. Who knows?
But Finkelstein has been
I
calling
think he
him
did
out
well
to debate.
against with Destiny. I mean, they were kind of on the same page. I think.
Destiny
Yeah,
is a
I mean, come on.
guy
Smart
plays
dude.
guitar on the internet.
Smart dude.
The fact that no, I'm not saying he's not smart, but I'm saying he has not dedicated his life to this. The fact that he's just picking up this hobby and he's out there debating the top dudes in this realm.
I don't know his content, but I would assume Destiny's life is not dedicated to this. His name is Destiny. It's a YouTube handle that I assume he uses for other things beyond this. So if Ben Shapiro is stalemating a guy who doesn't dedicate himself to this, that's not great for Ben Shapiro.
I think they were on the same side.
Oh.
It was
on
Destiny
that part.
was debating Finkelstein.
But everything else, I mean, Destiny knows how to debate.
Yeah, no, he will read the stuff, and he is amazing retention. Every time I see him, he has like this great recall. So it seems like if he reads something, it's locked in forever. Doesn't matter. That being said, what was the argument? What were we just talking about?
Ben Shapiro getting washed and Candace Owens is getting too big.
It's an unstoppable force. So I think what they're doing is they were worried that she was a runaway train with the brand.
Now, obviously, I don't think the new fans actually care that the show is becoming way too mainstream, or the fact that Andrew Schulz is avoiding the tough conversations of all the hate that they have been receiving. You can't forget that one of the reasons why Andrew Schulz and the Flagrant podcast became so popular was that Andrew was the edgy comedian, and he would drop some pretty edgy jokes and wasn't afraid of getting into heated conversations and ask the guests some very personal questions for content. I mean, they have the now infamous Fresh and Fit episode, which I think has aged very well, especially after everything that happened with Fresh. I mean, Fresh and Fit hasn't been doing so well, while on the other hand, Andrew Schulz created a family, so, good for him. Also, the Whitney Cummings episode, which was wild, and on top of that, the one with Brennan Schaub, which, arguably sparked one of the biggest comedy dramas in recent years.
What's with the Trash Tuesday beef? When are we going to settle the Trash Tuesday beef?
It's settled as far as,
Did you try to wog Annie Letterman to your truck?
No, it doesn't make sense. No. It doesn't make sense. No.
Okay, so then follow up.
But at some point, all that changed, and now it's no longer the same. For example, recently they finally made some jokes and somewhat addressed the whole Logan Paul Cryptozoo drama, which the fans have been bugging them about on the comments for the past 7 or 8 months. I believe it's been so long that it doesn't really matter now.
That's a crypto coins. That don't count.
Nah.
Let me
As opposed
understand
to
it.
crypto, what?
No, but when you come up with the fake coins, like they
Cryptozoo?
just
Sorry.
Yeah, what happened to Cryptozoo? That's what we need to figure. What happened to Cryptozoo?
That's you. You getting a subpoena later on. Get your shit together.
If SBF is getting 25 years, how long is Logan getting for Cryptozoo? Now, he shouldn't get the same amount, but he should go to jail for a little
he
bit.
needs to get at least 5 years for that fried chicken.
Yo, Logan should go to jail.
Yeah.
Logan should go to
He
jail.
should.
I just looked into this Cryptozoo thing. Did you guys find out about this Cryptozoo thing? I mean, he's obviously a racist for sending fried chicken paraphernalia to Alex.
Yeah.
But outside of his racism, he should go to fucking jail for this Cryptozoo thing. Why didn't nobody tell me about this?
Yeah.
Why didn't nobody comment on every podcast about it for the last 6 months? That would have been nice if they did that so we could know.
It's crazy. Crazy. Miles, you got any information on Cryptozoo?
Miles hasn't got any of his money back.
Yo, Miles just keeps waking
What does Miles do?
And by the way, if you made it this far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps out so much, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Now, we have mentioned this in the past, and I don't think Andrew Schulz not asking Logan Paul about Cryptozoo was that big of a deal. It just wouldn't have been productive, and at the end of the day, Logan has his scripted answers. But the argument is that they didn't make any jokes before that episode, during the episode, or after that episode until like 8 months later, when it doesn't really matter anymore. Now, they did mention at some point that they actually did ask Logan Paul about Cryptozoo, but that he asked them to delete it, which is fair. But then the explanation after that doesn't really make sense, and it just sounds like they were trying to make excuses for why they were being so nice to Logan Paul. I mean, keep in mind that back then, Logan and Dylan Dennis took over the internet, and no one except Andrew Schulz got a full-length podcast or interview with Logan Paul and Dylan Dennis. So I get that he wanted that opportunity, but it also seems like if he was willing to change his content and what he talked about on his show back when Logan was hot and trendy and trending, and now that the Impulsive podcast isn't doing so well or Logan isn't as hot anymore, he can get the jokes.
The whole investigation, people absolutely furious, rightfully furious about it. If you invested in money and nothing ever came to fruition, yeah, that's like stealing money from somebody. Now, you know, we've obviously had Logan on a few times. Every time we have him on, people are upset at us for not asking about this crypto thing. I just want to clarify here. We obviously asked him about the crypto thing. He said that there's an open investigation. Can we not talk about it? Can you cut it from the episode? So we're like, yeah, sure, we'll cut it from the episode. Now that he's paying back, I think that we can talk about this. But yeah, if there's any friend of the show that doesn't want a thing in the episode, we're not going to do it. I asked Louis before the episode, can we talk about, or is there anything you don't want to talk about? He's like, yeah, there might be one gigantic story. We didn't talk about that at all either. Yeah. Okay, so.
Now, I think the main difference here is that with Louis C.K., he did kind of apologize and address the whole thing right away. It wasn't like he was denying it or threatening to sue people from what I remember. He took the hit and even left the States. Since then, he's been back and sold out Madison Square Garden, but it was a big hit. But for Logan Paul, nothing really changed. I mean, the whole Cryptozoo thing gets exposed. He denies that he did anything wrong, and now he is richer than ever. I mean, it's business as usual. I'm not saying he should be canceled, but I'm saying if Louis C.K. was being accused of doing what something similar like Logan Paul did at a large scale or whatever, and then he denied it, threatened to sue people who called it out. And then after all that, if Andrew Schulz had him on the podcast and didn't ask him about, you know, what he was being accused of, then that would be something similar to the Logan Paul situation. However, not bringing up or talking about why Louis got canceled a few years ago, it's pretty polite and understandable, but it's nothing like not bringing up something that Logan Paul or something that someone is being currently accused of and sounds like it's a pretty big deal. And once again, instead of him leaning into all the hate, he actually got mad at the people that were calling him out for not asking about Cryptozoo.
You guys have overcomplicated the podcast. You had a good thing going on. What's up? What's up? You guys had a normal, simple thing. And you're like, no, we need wireless mics. We need introductions. We need 10 minutes of silence before we go so we can get dead air time.
I walked out of the bathroom and Joe's just going, there's really no need for all this. I think podcasting is better.
It's better. You've overcomplicated things.
You have.
Yeah.
We have.
Well, everybody wanted to be on the Tonight Show, so you made your own Tonight Show. Look at this.
For you.
You got stage lighting and shit. It's hilarious.
But you kind of did this. That's the thing.
But I didn't do this.
He's just doing that so you don't think it's a bad idea anymore.
Exactly. This is your fault.
He doesn't mean that.
This is all you. What did I do? I didn't do any of this.
Yeah, you did nothing.
I didn't do anything.
You did absolutely nothing. No responsibility whatsoever.
Yes.
Those of you who watch on YouTube right now, you notice that we're in a way different setting. Okay, those of you listening online might notice some differences, but if you watch, you really see some differences, maybe some game-changing differences. I don't want to say it exactly just yet, but if you're watching with the video,
It's pretty clear.
it's very clear.
Very, very clear.
Not just the studio. There's something else that's
It's not a
different.
podcast anymore.
Son, what is it?
It feels like
TV show.
It definitely feels like a TV show.
Yo, it's a TV show, but we got to stop using the word TV
It's
to
a
qualify content.
Okay.
Because,
I see what you mean.
you know what I mean? Like,
show.
you might watch an HBO show on your phone.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, back when they got their new studio about 4 years ago, they did try to do what they're doing now with the whole show, but it didn't really work out. They had a smaller studio. That's when they tried to do the whole thing with no microphones on camera. I think they were doing boom mics from the top down, and you know, they didn't have the same lavalier mics that they're using now. So obviously the criticism is not that the show has changed, and it's no longer a podcast, because that was always the plan from at least from like 4 years ago. And also, obviously, as a comic, Andrew Schulz is absolutely killing it. He's still massively successful. But when it comes to the show, the podcast, it's definitely falling off, and it's very clear. And even though I do like his crowd work material and some of his stand-up comedy, to me, podcasting and comedy and stand-up comedy are two completely different things. For example, to me, comedians like Andrew Schulz, Bobby Lee, Theo Von, obviously Joe Rogan, Tony Hinchcliffe, Bert Kreischer at some point, and even Tom Segura, I've always thought of them more as podcasters instead of actual stand-up comedians, and not in a bad way. Obviously, if I see them in person live, I'm pretty sure I would enjoy all of their stand-up, except for maybe Bert Kreischer. But then when it comes to comedians like Louis C.K., Bill Burr, Dave Chappelle, and even Shane Gillis now, I enjoy their stand-up comedy way more than their podcast. Obviously, naturally, they crush it on when they do podcasts like Shane Gillis is doing at the moment. However, when it comes to Schulz, the fact that it feels like they're no longer putting that much effort into the show, that's not a good sign. That's exactly what happened with Two Bears, One Cave. It went from being a decent comedy show with bits, jokes, and it was a good way to keep up with Tom Segura and watching Bert Kreischer get roasted. But then it clearly turned into just a platform for them to sell and promote things, and they also never address any of the hate or the criticism.
We are back. I got to tell you, there's this thing that happened over the last few months, which is that everybody has discovered the wonder of just nicotine straight to the system.
Let me tell you, I didn't know where you're going with this. If I could invest in anything, and we just know we launched a vodka.
Yeah.
I wish we had put it in big tobacco.
Now, in my opinion, the Flagrant podcast is nowhere near as bad as Two Bears, One Cave, but obviously it's no longer the same. And it makes sense. I mean, Mark now has his own thing, his own podcast, and he's a comedian. Akash is also doing his own thing, and then obviously Andrew Schulz. And also, I think it would be entertaining to see Andrew Schulz addressing all the hate and all the negative criticism, like the way that he was acting on the Whitney Cummings episode, to him now trying to be a modern day philosopher and all his Schulz epiphanies, and the fact that he's a completely different person when he does his own show versus when he does other people's podcasts. And once again, I still think that the podcast is nowhere near as bad as Two Bears, One Cave, and that there's still some hope. It can still be saved. But honestly, I don't blame him. I mean, I don't blame Schulz. He sold out 2 theaters here in my city, and the guy is actually killing it. So I can see why the podcast is not as attractive anymore. However, that's my main criticism for all these podcasters, that they blow up thanks to the show, and then they completely forget about it. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Dislike if you didn't like the video. But that is all we have for today. See ya.